So as you can hear, it's raining outside, so this foundering car will not be in driving mode, but just relax from house. We will talk about drivetrains. So there are 5 different drivetrains. To start with front engine, front wheel drive. Then you have front engine, rear wheel drive, mid engine, rear wheel drive, rear engine, rear wheel drive, and all wheel drive, oftentimes front engine, and then driving all wheels. I've driven all these 5 drivetrains, so I've driven all of them 5, but I only bought myself 3. So which drivetrains did I buy? Front wheel drive, so front engine, front wheel drive. I also bought a rear engine, rear wheel drive, so the extremities there, and I bought all wheel drive. So why didn't I buy the others? So the remaining ones are the front engine rear wheel drive and the mid engine rear wheel drive. So to begin with the front engine rear wheel drive, I think it drives very mature. So you get the feeling of being pushed. Typical BMW, Mercedes in the past, which is a benefit of course, but it also feels a little bit lazy, a little bit slow, and when it then sets and goes for the corner, it might feel that you lose it, and then it's harder to correct it. So I think my biggest problem with this is that I compare rear wheel drive with each other, and if I compare it with rear engine rear wheel drive, which I had and also drove, for example 911 GT3 RS on the track, but also Tesla Model S P85, which had the performance rear wheel drive engine, or SECMA, very lightweight type of car. I find that the sensation and the flickability, I think that's the case, that there's a little bit of excitement is missing with the front and the rear wheel drive setup. So that's a thing. The other thing is that if I also compare it with mid-engine rear wheel drive, the front engine rear wheel drive we are talking about, then I also see that it's less flickable. So with a mid-engine rear wheel drive, the engine is in the mid, and then it's driven to the rear wheels. So for example, on my MR2 of Toyota, of Lotus Elise, or the Boxster, I find them a lot more exciting to drive than a front engine rear wheel drive setup. But it might be me. I think if I've never driven a front engine, I'd never driven a rear engine rear wheel drive or owned one, or mid engine rear wheel drive or owned one. I did not own the mid engine, but then I would have more love for the front and the rear wheel drive. I must say though that there are 2 exceptions, the front and the rear wheel drive, which I find very exciting. One is if you go for the 7 road. So the original Lotus 7 is now, for example, made by Caterham, Donkervoort, Dutch company. I'm a Dutchman, but also Westfield still producing them, if I'm correct, and that is very exciting. You feel that it's a little bit slower in a turn, but because I think it's so much lighter, some of those Caterhams are like 450, 500 kilograms, something like that. So even if you compare it with an MX-5, Miata, Renault Roadster of Mazda, then it's half the weight. And another thing with the front and the rear wheel drive is you have the most room between the engine, which sits at the front, and the wheels driven, which are at the rear. So you have a lot of parasitic loss there, and a lot of room lost also for the tunnel, to channel that power from the engine all the way to the back. Yeah, that also results in parasitic loss, and that's the highest with the front and the rear wheel drive. Only higher when you have a car with all-wheel drive, for example, the Audi TT 3.2 DSG is all-wheel drive, so you have the engine in the front, and then both front and rear engine or rear wheels are driven. But even that decouples the rear wheel drive if not needed, so to be more efficient in general, the front and the rear wheel drive. And if you compare it with Tesla Model S 100D, so it has 2 engines, one sitting at the rear on top of the driven X, and one sitting at the front on top of the driven X. So you don't have all that tunnel needed, so the efficiency is there even better in my opinion. And the other exception is that you have a front and a rear wheel drive with very much power, so you can offset the back a little bit more with power, so to correct it easier and to also make it more exciting. So for example, BMW M3, BMW M4, M5, something like that, or the AMGs of Mercedes, the cars, and the Alpinas also, BMW. Those cars are exciting. Also a Corvette with a front and a rear wheel drive is exciting. And that are exceptions. But then you have a car with so much power that if you want to exploit it, you have to drive quite hard. And then also on the roads, being on track or on the autobahn or whatever, you can have some things going wrong. So you might lose some grip, and then I would rather have an all-wheel drive system that can easier correct for all that grip loss and can even easier manage all that power. So that's my my beef with the front and rear wheel drive. Mid and rear wheel drive, I like a little bit more as a driving perspective, but it's not practical. Because you have the engine in the mid, you will lose the back, you will lose the front. There's only very limited room to store something in, and it's just not a practical car. You don't have a real trunk, and that might be the case that I would resettle that, but it could also be like a 7 derivative if you have an estate, if you have multiple garage, or you're retired, so you don't need to haul some stuff. Then this could be a dedicated car and would be very nice. If a mid-engine rear wheel drive, I would also look at the Lotus Elise. I really like that. Or a derivative thereof, the Opel Speedster, also like that. And those are both open top. You have also the Exigio of Lotus, which is a hardtop Elise, so to say. Or Boxer is also quite a lot of value if you look at how much they cost compared to 911s. But I think the Boxer will rise in price. So at the time it will not be so accessible anymore. And the Elises, etc. are not being made anymore, so that was also hard. Okay, so we talked about the drivetrains I did not choose. Then why did I choose the drivetrains that I did? I already mentioned a little bit about all-wheel drive, so let's start there. You have ample grip. So for example, Tesla Model S 100D, you have so much grip, you don't have tires screeching, you will pull like a extreme amount of power, so you will accelerate very hard if needed. You will not burn your tires. You also have excellent regeneration because you have two engines directly sitting on top of the axis, which is the best layout perhaps even. But the Tesla Model S is a heavy car, over 2000 kilograms, so that's also points out to the drawback of electric configuration at this time. But I really liked that car. It was my dream car and I had it and I really liked it. So grip is one thing. It's very predictable. You have a solution for every situation. And if you compare it, for example, with the Audi TT DSG, it's also a very nice car. There's so much grip, so you will be easy off the traffic lights. You will not get wheel spin. You will have good traction. Also, the traction is a lot better with the FR car than, for example, front wheel drive car, especially from a stop, because it loads the power more to the rear wheels. That's also a drawback of the other drivetrain I have the most, I think, in my car history is the front engine, front wheel drive drivetrain. But before I get into that, all-wheel drive has a lot of benefits. It also, for example, the TT has a little bit more of parasitic loss as compared to a normal front wheel drive, because it also has an additional axis at the back being driven, but it can often be cut off. So you have like a joint that is then, instead of engaged, released, and it's not draining the engine that much. So that's a good thing. So really good drivetrain, but it's a little bit heavier, more complex, so it will be a little bit less engaging than a front wheel drive derivative, because it's a little bit heavier at turn in, but it will offer you superior grip. Then onto the front engine, front wheel drive type of car. I think it's excellent. And why? You have the engine on top of the driven wheels. and that gives you a few points. One is that you have less parasitic loss, so the better fuel economy, better performance, especially at speed if traction is not so much an issue. And if you go from a dead stop, then you will scream for traction, because if your engine is at the front and the front wheels are also driven and you accelerate hard, you go a little bit like this. So you will lift off the traction of your front wheel. But it also adds to the drama for me. And because it's so easy, you don't have all the additional parts. You have a car that's quite light. And if you compare that, so of course, rear wheel driven doesn't have this problem. But for example, an Integra Type R, if you compare that to the very good front engine rear wheel drive system of the time, turn-in of an Integra Type R is excellent. If you, for example, compare it to a Sylvia S14 of the time or S13, and same if you compare with a BMW 330, 328, something like that. I think 328 was more of the competitor, because it's so much lighter, because it's less complex. Also Fiat Coupe 2012, which was a 2-liter 5-cylinder with 4 valves per cylinder, was excellent, offering quite good traction. It was of course a lot heavier and more luxurious than the Integra Type R, but it offered more torque to cope with it. Of course, if you go too much in horsepower, then you will have torque steer, or you can cope with that. Focus RS coped with that with the trick diff, but also Megane is coping with it now in Integra, Honda Integra Type R. It's turbocharged and over 300 horsepower, and they're still able to cope with that. So that is that, and because you have that at the front, you have the entire rest of the car suitable for passengers. So you have a good passenger compartment, and you have a very good trunk. So you have the benefit of performance, lightweight, efficiency, and practicality, which makes FF a win for me, a real win. And that's also the reason why they are the most dominant force in the cars that I owned. Then if you go to the rear wheel drive section, I really like that. It's like a reverse front engine front wheel drive, because you have the rear, the engine at the rear, and also driven to the rear wheels directly. So the same applies, less parasitic loss than other drivetrains. And the added benefit is, as you remember, if you have, this is the front and this is the rear, if the rear engine is sitting on top of the rear wheels, you will have a lot of traction there. So also in bad condition, which is a benefit of front engine front wheel drive, if you're not able to really hard accelerate, for example snow or ice, you still have quite good traction, or in mud with a front engine front wheel drive compared to front engine rear wheel drive. But a rear engine rear wheel drive is even better traction. That's also the reason why, for example, the Alpine A110, which is now revigorated again, I think now in MR layout, but that, what is front engine rear wheel drive? I've not driven that new one, but the old one had a rear engine rear wheel drive, and I really liked it because you have very good grip, and also in rally they were quite successful. But back to that, so the rear engine rear wheel drive, so if you accelerate, there's already a lot of pressure because the engine is sitting on top of the driven wheels, and you don't have any parasitic loss because it's directly there, like front engine. But now, if you accelerate, you push even more pressure on the rear axle, so you have excellent traction, and that gives you excellent acceleration as well. So in terms of efficiency, this is the best package, and also in driving fun, this is the best package. The drawback, however, is that you lose the trunk. So hatchback design is out of place normally. You can only solve this with an electric drivetrain because it's so compact. You can deal with it. There's also a drivetrain if you have a very small engine, like for example the new Twingo. It also has a rear engine rear wheel drive layout. So that could be, but Twingo doesn't drive like a 911 because they made a lot of things. You cannot bypass the traction control, you have to cut something. But normally you cannot turn it off. So it is made more safe than to be a pleasure to drive. So that's the benefit of the rear engine rear wheel drive. And also, for example, if you brake very hard, You still have, you can have the pressure on the front wheels, but still, because it's so light, you can still steer even on the hard braking. For example, the 911 GT3 RS that I drove at the TT Essen circuit in the Netherlands for a day. It was excellent. Braking is so good because you still have the flickability, and also it's even more able to restore it than a mid-engine. Mid-engine is more stable than front-engine rear-wheel drive, in my opinion, to give you this good ability to slide and correct again. And rear-engine rear-wheel drive can be even better, in my opinion, my personal opinion. I think most will say supercar should be mid-engine rear-wheel drive, but with the rear-engine rear-wheel drive, example the 911, you could have a two-seater, like a convertible or a GT3 RS Cup, and when they remove the backseat, but there are backseats, so you still have the passenger compartment optimized for a rear-wheel driven car. That is, you could have, you will lose the trunk, of course, because there's sitting a big engine, unless it's very small or electric, but you still have a little bit room at the front, which is also very small. But you have a compartment that you can sit in. There are some examples of a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car that could be a 2+2. I think the Lotus Evora was once a 2+2, which is excellent, and I've never driven that, but it's on my list. So I think that could be a very good competitor, and perhaps even better. Could be the benefit if that engine is then in the mid, and you have two additional seats that you might have a little bit of trunk. Could be more practical. But that's it in a nutshell. So there are 5 drivetrains, and I owned front-engine front-wheel drive, rear-engine rear-wheel drive, and all-wheel drive. I did not own, because those have benefits both in efficiency, a lot less drivetrain losses. Also on the hard conditions, they are still capable of getting traction, which I like a lot. And all-wheel drive gives you the absolute best grips ever. And I had the all-wheel drive Tesla Model S that is superb in efficiency as well. The TT that I had for a short time, because it went to my wife, had the decoupling, so you still have that front-engine front-wheel drive efficiency in most cases. Front-engine rear-wheel drive, I found you need to have a lot of power to make it exciting, or to be very lightweight. So a lot of power, M3, M4, something like that, or AMG, and lightweight KTM. The rear-engine rear-wheel drive I really like, because it is flickable. It has also all the traction there. 911, Alpine AM110, Segma. It's always a nice and fun way to live, to have. And some opportunities you still have a 2+2, which I really like if you're a father with children. And then the ones that I did not buy is the front and the rear wheel drive, because I find it a little bit heavy and a little bit overly complex compared to the others that I said, especially the other rear wheel drive. And the mid-engine rear wheel drive, because you lose a lot of practicality with the engine sitting in the middle. So almost everything is then covered, and less benefits than, for example, front-engine rear wheel drive has. So, hope this helps. Foundering car out. It stopped raining, so let's get out and drive.